For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
That's what I tell people. If you're looking for a lot of students in class, they say, I am actually actively looking for a job. Would you help me find one? And I say, no problem. And hit me up on LinkedIn, send me a message and tell me 3 things, right?
Cool. Well, hey friends, Cloud Bart here. I'm just sitting down for a little chat with some cloud friends. There's going to be many more in the weeks to come ahead. Today, I'm reaching out into my extended pool of AWS instructors and cloud trainers that I've met over the years. Some people that I know really well and some people that I don't know really well, and a chance for me to kind of catch up with them and talk about some of the cloud computing and career stuff that's going on out there. So I really appreciate everybody kind of tuning in. Today, we are joined by Marko Sluga from Marko Cloud. And Marko is a trainer that I met through Global Knowledge. Marko, are you out there?
I'm here. I'm right here, sitting, just waiting for my cue, which was now. Yeah, thanks, Bart. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to sort of get this chat going on. We've been planning this for a little bit, over a month or something like that. So it's finally, the day has finally come and it's finally happened. And yeah, I'm super excited so we can talk about some cool stuff.
Now, Marko, you're joining us from up north in Canada there?
Yes,
I'm in North Carolina.
Yeah. I'm in Canada. I'm in Southern Ontario. Small little town called Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's close to Niagara Falls. Everybody knows Niagara Falls. So I'm about half an hour away from there. So it's, it's a nice place to live in. It's rural. It's a bunch of vineyards and peach trees around me. So great place to raise your family and great place to be able to work from home.
Now, is that kind of the greater Toronto area then? Is that roughly?
We're sort of on the edge of the greater Toronto area. So the greater Toronto area would be reaching out across Mississauga towards Hamilton. They call it the greater Hamilton Toronto area now, or Toronto Hamilton area. So there's it's now called, there's even another term. It's called the Golden Horseshoe because it's a horseshoe shaped sort of bunch of cities around the western part of Lake Ontario. That's sort of the Golden Horseshoe would be on the edge of the Golden Horseshoe.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's good imagery too. I can picture the horseshoe right now.
Yeah.
Well, Marko, one of the things that I invited you on to chat about today is, of course, the world of cloud computing and, what it's like to be a trainer and live through the continuous ongoing certification world that we kind of find ourselves presented with here. One of the interesting trends, and I guess before we get too far along, I should give you a sec to introduce yourself cloud and tech-wise. So maybe you should just give us a quick 5 minutes on where you are in the cloud space and what you do with customers, clients, and how you deal with these vendors, man. What's the deal?
Yeah, it's a crazy world out there. So I've been in IT for about 20 years, and I've been doing training for the best of the last 8-9 years, pretty much. So I started out in the open source world, right? So my history sort of reaches down into infrastructure, virtualization, and then virtualization, leads into cloud directly, right? There's the next step off of virtualization is cloud, and then you're presented with everything, right? Here it is. Here's everything that you used to have 10 colleagues to help you with. Now you're sort of covered in cloud, right? And cloud sort of led me into DevOps and a bit of scripting, which I was never sort of good at. I'm starting to actually get decent at scripting.
Woohoo. Nice.
And
that's great.
I started with open source. My first sort of training was on OpenStack. So that's sort of back in 2011, 2012 when it was just an unknown project pretty much. And I've seen it sort of grow and also sort of fade away a little bit, right? They had a really big identity crisis back in 2015. I had some ideas. I'm just one guy, so no real input there. It's all about the big players that are going to be really directing the identity of the group. And now they're sort of where they are. That training sort of has fizzled away, but I still do some consulting in OpenStack.
Yeah.
So that's good because it's gone away from learning about it to actually whoever has learned about it, they want to implement it now, right? The thing about OpenStack is that actually got me into AWS. Because when I was talking about OpenStack, everybody was saying, "Oh, how does that compare to AWS?" And I was like,
"Oh, sure. Yeah.
I really don't know because I don't know it that much, right? I used to use it for, a little bit of infrastructure back in 2010, and I had some contact with EC2 Classic and stuff like that. So back in the old days, right? And then 2012, 2013 rolls around and they're starting to ask me like more and more questions about AWS. So then I had to go back and say, okay, I need to start learning AWS like really bad. So I got my certs, and in 2016 I started training for global knowledge, where you also used to be a trainer. So it's been pretty much AWS all the way. I've got the certs. I'm missing 3 specialty certs right now. I'm missing machine learning, data analysts, and database, which
some of the 2 new ones.
The 2 new ones plus the machine learning, which I've been learning for about a year and getting ready to take the exam, and I actually have it scheduled on Monday. And I'm kind of not really certain that I can pass that one, honestly, because it's more like it's maths, man. It's not about
algorithms
IT anymore.
Lots of algorithms. Yeah,
it's not about IT anymore. ML is like a whole different subject, and big data sort of was one that I struggled with before when I was doing my exams. Everything else I basically work with a lot. Whereas big data, my only input in big data was like analyzing logs and doing some basic SQL queries. And then when you're looking at the landscape for big data, you got to be sort of a data analyst, right? So
it helps. Yeah, it helps to understand that angle. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm pretty confident that right now, after being certified, doing that big data certification and teaching people about big data, that I can pass the database and data analyst certs pretty easily, or with a little bit of struggle. But for ML, man, that's like, wow, that's dangerous. And then on top of AWS, I just recently became a Google Cloud authorized trainer. So
I was excited to see that one pop up on your LinkedIn there.
Yeah, hat trick, cloud hat trick.
He's the triple threat.
Triple threat. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and Marko, I really appreciate you sharing kind of that arc there, because I think a lot of people are coming from enterprise support infrastructures. That's the world that they're living in still. Even this late into the game, there are still customers out there who are looking at virtualization and trying to understand how that fits into their data centers.
For
sure.
So
even in 2020. So kind of interesting. No, could you maybe give us just a quick tidbit on where does OpenStack fit? Because I know it pretty well. I've had some experience with it. It's an incredibly technical platform. So maybe just a quick one for folks who aren't familiar with OpenStack.
All right. So OpenStack basically is trying to, honestly, I'm just going to say what it is. It's trying to mimic AWS features that you can build on your own, right?
Very modular.
It has a modular infrastructure. You can drop in modules for services similar to EC2, similar to RDS, similar to DynamoDB, etc. Right? They have different names. They have their own API. So what they're trying to build is a modular infrastructure that's API addressable, fully automated, and you can add and remove components as you need. Right?
Nice.
So what you're
and
doing
largely
is
like hardware agnostic, right?
It's completely hardware agnostic. It's completely agnostic of the operating system that you're running on, as long as it's Linux, of course. And it's like the Linux kernel. Right? The OpenStack Foundation actually builds the product to a format where you have to take it and, refine it and make it deployable and make it easy to use.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, are you going to go and install the Linux kernel and build an operating system on your own? Probably not.
Maybe as a doctorate program or a fun weekend project.
Probably not for your own in-house purposes, right? It's a little more advanced, where you have package managers and operating systems that will help you install the services, but they're gonna be like, there's no guarantee that this works, right? Once you install all of them, you're on your own, right? So that's where OpenStack is. That's where OpenStack has been for a long time. They have this installer which lets you build containers called Cola, which is pretty cool, which simplifies things because it's containers, right?
Yeah,
You're
sure.
not tying it all into the operating system. When it's containers, it's much easier to update and much easier to manage over time. But still, even with that, it gets pretty complicated. So you have vendors out there like Red Hat and SUSE and whoever,
Sure.
IBM and others that build their own OpenStack versions and will essentially let you deploy their commercial
Like
sort of
flavor of it.
open sourced commercial kind of like the Red Hat operating system. It's open source, but you license the support sort of.
Yeah, sure. Oh, and I love that. That was a great recap on it. And to that point, all the OpenStack deployments I've run into were larger or middle grade service providers who were building their own internal cloud infrastructures, heavily customized for their deliveries that they needed.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's not a one rack system.
No, and
That's
these guys all spoke to the deepness of understanding and proficiency that they needed across virtualization, networking, and automation to bring together something like OpenStack in a viable product for customer-facing deployments.
yes,
Or,
plus platforms, plus definitely all the platforms. You
of
have
course,
to be
you think with the workload parts of it.
completely. You have to be completely secure about your understanding of MySQL or whatever you're deploying to be able to deploy the database services that support that MySQL. So you got to have somebody who's a very heavyweight on databases who's just going to support that platform as a service and not make it go wrong because it's still an open source product and there's still no official certification. Yes, this actually works with this. It's all
Sure.
about trial and error still at the end of the day, right? But yeah,
You better have your
definitely.
good testing on your own there.
Yeah, and you're on your own for most stuff, especially when you want long-term support. Right now, this is sort of a pain point. They're promising some long-term support, which is going to be 18 months, right? Which the problem is OpenStack is a development project as a design, right? So being a
That's the
development
great
project,
branding of it. Yeah.
being a development project, you're not going to support a version for longer than a year, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a development project. We're trying to add features. It's not a 1.0, right? All OpenStack releases have a code name, which means this is not even beta, essentially, right? As far as this software is concerned, even though it's been in development since like 2010. So you think 10 years, man, it'd be time to do a long-term support, time to do a real, something that I can take and deploy. But they're like,
Sure.
yeah, we want to keep that option open for vendors to build their own software. Now, one really cool piece of software that I met back in the old days was Fuel, which was built by Mirantis, which was a
Okay.
deployment engine, was a graphical user interface. You could drop a DVD back then, right? Drop a DVD into your machine and install OpenStack, right? And install all the features. It would automatically use what is now the Ironic program, which is a bare metal deployment solution. It would
Sure.
automatically use the bare metal solution, find your machines in the network, and deploy everything, right? So that's something that was really amazing, which Mirantis, because it lost interest in OpenStack and sort of picked up interest in Kubernetes and Docker. They were like, yeah, you know what? We're losing interest, so we just abandoned that product. So that was a great product that I'm super sad to see go, because OpenStack really had a chance to become what is still needed right now, something to compete with on-premises virtualization that has automation on it.
Sure.
Right?
And not a massive amount of immediate technical debt.
If you want cloud, building your own cloud, great if you have tens of data centers to run from.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
Because the idea that building your own cloud makes sense to me doesn't make a lot of sense. You're not able to just deploy in any place on the globe, right? You're not able to get your resources in 5 minutes that you can do that in public cloud. In private
Sure.
cloud, you're still limited by that box that you've built. You're still limited by your rule of thumb. So private cloud, yeah, it's cool. It's got automation, and if you know what you're going to run on it, there is definitely a use case. If you're sort of the new age kind of my app's going to go viral, then private cloud doesn't make any sense. If you're a bank, then private cloud might make a lot of sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, and Marco, that's a great recap of it. And, the stories of OpenStack fitting into enterprises and not fitting in, and how open source follows those same patterns is a great sales pitch for why public cloud versus on-prem solutions are so different, and why so many businesses struggle to make sense of that relationship and when to pick and how to pick each one of those. Um, Now, one thing I was going to say here is that we just talked about some of the most technical types of things you could do, building a custom platform from open source components and supporting it yourself. Now, that takes teams of highly trained individuals with specialties and generalizations. So it kind of got me thinking, a lot of vendors are switching into this like role-based certification model. And I think it's good. I think it's bad. I think it's got some interesting parts to it. Particularly when we look at like Microsoft, it used to be certify on a server, certify on the SQL, certify on the Exchange. And now we're seeing them in the Azure era for them, looking towards vendors like AWS, who have always been role-based, and saying, hey, let's go with an architect. Let's go with the developer. Let's go with an administration type of role. So what do you think? Is that a good trend? Does that help learners out? Does it put a lot more burden on learners? I'm just curious what your thoughts about role-based certifications are these days.
Yeah, the fact that you have a role-based certification actually for the learner makes it much easier to focus on what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're a developer, you don't need to learn about the server. You need to learn how to interact with the APIs. You need to learn how to use the, managed services pretty much. If you're heavy on the infrastructure side, if you're a SysOps person and you want to manage all of your company's platforms, then you've got a SysOps certification. And if you're just designing infrastructure, then you've got your architect track, right? That's what AWS is, and other vendors are sort of following that same structure, right? And having that role-based approach for the learner, I think it's easier to focus. But it also means that for the starting cert, you got to learn a lot, right?
Yes, it's a huge plateful.
Yeah, for SysOps, right? Even look at Cloud Practitioner in AWS, right?
Yep. Oh yeah, go for it.
You got to know all of the AWS services.
It's like 70 services still, yeah.
Yeah, right? You got to have a surface level understanding, like EC2, virtual machine, ECS, container, nothing else. Like that's really the basic knowledge that you need, but you got to know all of those, right? And then you're trying to do that for the other platforms, and then you got role-based. I think from the role-based ones, from the associate tier, the SysOps is again a lot of, width of knowledge. You got to understand the whole track because you got to manage the whole cloud, right?
Sure.
The admin is more towards the infrastructure. The developers are more towards managed services. Although they need to both know, a bit of the other, they're sort of like polar opposites almost, right? Whereas SysOps is kind of in between and has to know both. So if you're going to go for all three, I say start with SysOps, then go to either of the other ones.
I love that you said that, because I hear all the statistics say solutions architect is the most popular one, but I'm always like, that's funny because it's the one the farthest from classic job duties when I think of what most people do day to day.
Exactly.
It's like fact gathering, requirement gathering, a lot of stakeholder management parts of it there. And a lot of that is just not administration and development work that a lot of systems engineers think of. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I advise learners to do too, is look at SysOps if you're really thinking administration. That is the do, implement, and support role that you're trying to talk about there.
I think that the reason why the solutions architect is so much more popular is the fact that people want to be solutions architects. Right?
It is a fun
You're
role,
an admin, but you want to be the one that designs the system. You want to be the one that actually brings it into life, right? So even with an admin role, people go for the solutions architect exam, even though their job prospects are, right now with their experience still, you're not going to get a systems architect role. And the associate tier, it's not a very high level of there's not a high level of understanding required to pass the associate tier, right? And that's true for both. Well, no, I'm gonna back out here. It's true for AWS and it's true for Azure for the base levels, but it's not true for Google Cloud. There's a little bit of a difference there because in the associate tier, you actually got to know what each command does. So they're very much pushing you towards not just like, general understanding of services, but actually have you been using this cloud, and they're testing whether or not whether you don't know how to use it, but whether you have actually been using it, which is a difference. With Google Cloud is a little bit of a difference.
I've heard other trainers say that as well. In general, Google is thought of as a more, I don't know, perhaps sophisticated technical platform that's geared towards a higher level, perhaps, of like development. But I don't entirely agree 100%. But the command line sentiment and the API call sentiments, I've heard others echo that there as well. And that does indicate a very different level of understanding, especially when you're timed and you only have so much time to get through an exam. Your proficiency has to kick in to get those answers right in the right time frame, or you're just going to compromise the exam.
Yeah, for sure. Having that role-based certification, right? Actually, yeah, it can be helpful, but it can be also, a dangerous thing on one hand.
Sure.
Because it's just very, very wide in knowledge sometimes, right? And having a certification like with Microsoft, a server certification, can be easier sometimes, right?
I tend to think it is a lot. I have been talking at CBT Nuggets. We train a lot in VMware and Cisco and Microsoft. And so I'm regularly peer reviewing other trainers' content in those courses. And I recently came to me, CCIE is always put at the top. It's one of the high echelon, high claiming salary certs, and it takes quite a bit of education to get to the point where you can pass those tests. And I challenged some of my CCIE friends recently to say, I almost think that a cloud generalist has as much work cut out for them as a CCIE specialist does, because of the many, many things that we have to be not just proficient in, but able to understand the value behind and speak to different teams about in the cloud space. This is part of what I think is the challenge of being a good solutions architect, a true cloud generalist, like what I think is really successful. And when you think of some of the people you might know who fit that category, they do have deep understanding in databases and security, authentication realms, monitoring, log analysis, all of the many different pillars that take IT to work. So I was just curious, do you kind of echo any of that? Do you feel similarly?
Well, I think that, being in cloud, you sort of have to become not a jack of all trades and master of none, but a master of all trades, period, right?
That's kind of what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, because that's what cloud brings, right? You got to know all of these different things before you can even start building a solution, right? So that's sort of something that's completely common, and something that is hard to understand for most students, where they come from a role-based, very tightly defined roles, right? Like,
sure,
I'm a server admin. No, in cloud, you're not a server admin anymore. You got to know how to automate. You got to know how to use some configuration management. Oh, but no, DevOps people do that. Well, if you're a DevOps person, you got to know that too, but you got to know how to manage your environment, and you got to manage your security. Oh, no, but security people do that. Well, no. I mean, if you're not doing security in DevOps, you're not doing DevOps, right? One thing that I like to say is I hate the term DevSecOps.
Well, wait, there was a DevOps where we shouldn't have security?
Yeah. Why DevSecOps? What does it, I mean, what does that term even mean, right?
Sure. It's more like DevOps for the security team, but I totally agree with you on that one too.
DevSecOps, I mean, if you're doing DevOps, security team needs to sit in the DevOps, somebody from the security team needs to sit in the DevOps environment. If they're not, then you're doing something really, really, really wrong.
Yeah, it's like when I hear DevSecOps, I'm like, which part of break down organizational barriers did we miss in the first part of DevOps? Because that was the bigger cultural problem that we talked about.
Right.
Well, that's funny. So along those lines, too, when we think about how organizations and how learners are going to begin this adventure, I find that role-based certifications are good for somebody who is getting into the industry, quote unquote. But as a veteran, or whatever term you want to apply it, as an old dude who's been in cloud for a while, I find that I tend to focus more on specialty stuff now, because I've done the generalist piece, and now I kind of like individual vendor certifications or individual study patterns, because those are the thing I need to dive for this customer, or the one I need to dive for this particular project I'm pitching. So I find some of it complements each other, and it's like, you have to eat the entire cake if you want to learn about this one service. I hate to force people into that later, but I do like role-based early on. I do think that makes a lot of sense. Do you think businesses get the roles based? Do you think job descriptions are echoing the right roles in job listings? I hear a lot of people complain about this. Can't find a job. I'm looking for cloud on such and such hiring site. Do you see that lining up well? Are businesses getting it?
If it's a job that's looking at like, it's an AWS job, it's a Google Cloud job, it's an Azure job, then it will fit that description of the role-based certification. Otherwise, if it's, we're looking for a DevOps engineer, we're looking for somebody who's doing data science, and, that doesn't really align very well, because there's different platforms that people use for those. And, they're more interested in you knowing Jenkins or you knowing Hadoop than whether you've got the cert from a certain cloud provider to run technically those services at the cloud provider environment. But if it's like, we're looking for an AWS architect, then you can clearly see that, you need the associate and professional tier certification to match what this job is doing. But other than I would say, other than the typical job roles that are associated with the associate and professional tier, I don't see the speciality being sort of matched to any jobs at this moment. The thing about cloud jobs is also that, they come in many different flavors, and companies are going to be trying to go into one cloud today, and then they're going to switch and go to another cloud tomorrow because they get approached and they get good offers, and, cloud vendors are trying to compete with each other. So, like, when you're in cloud, get ready. You're going to be studying and you're going to be switching platforms, and your job description, what it is right now, might not be it at all in 1 year. So more than looking for a specific type of job, look for like, a wider range of jobs. If you can't find a job in the cloud, it's probably because you're looking at, companies like AWS
limited
or Microsoft
scope, maybe.
or Google or somebody, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be working for the provider, right? You can go to some, XYZ industry, like go into healthcare, go into automotive, go into, retail. There's a ton of cloud jobs there, and they can't find people because there's a deficit, right? There's a deficit. There's a huge deficit. The IT jobs in general, if you look at developers included, right? With developers are sort of the major portion, but IT jobs in general, there's like 200,000 jobs that are, not being filled in the whole of North America right now. So
that rotates.
That's sort of like, you can find those jobs. They might not be in the glamour industry, right? It might not be in Silicon Valley, right? It'll be, I don't know, upstate Michigan, but it's a cloud job. So that's, if you're a beginner and if you're looking for a cloud job, I say, keep your options open, go somewhere and treat your job like they're your neighbors, right? You might move someday. Well, you probably are going to move someday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I see a lot of people looking like, what job role should I go look for? And I'm like, that might be putting the cart before the horse there. I would ask myself more like, where exactly am I able or willing to work, like within the US? And then ask yourself, what kinds of companies do I even care about working for? Would I work for a defense contractor? Would I work for an energy company? Would I work for a healthcare provider? And those are big categories. And then ask yourself what kind of work you might do for those companies. So I think like, okay, let's flip it on its head. You guys are thinking about the little slice first, and I'm saying let's think about the larger ecosystem of jobs that are out there. Because if you are willing to relocate, even just temporarily, you now have a massive new selection of opportunities to choose from.
For sure. Yeah. That's what I tell people. If you're looking for a lot of students in class, they say, I am actually actively looking for a job. Would you help me find one? And I say, no problem. And hit me up on LinkedIn, send me a message and tell me 3 things, right? Where do you want to work? What's your geographical area?
Oh, that's great.
Right. That's the first thing, because
that's perfect.
Without knowing where they want to work, you can't, offer them a job. And second thing, right? What's your current strength and what's your aspirations? Right.
Nice.
That's all you need, right? I'm right now good at virtualization. I'm aspiring to be, an automation specialist. Wow.
Fantastic.
That's enough. and I can get that kind of person a job, no problem.
A
I'm
to
getting
B.
like, I have like probably 50, 60 connections on LinkedIn that are actively looking continuously for cloud engineers and constantly, send me descriptions, send us over candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
sure,
fantastic.
no
We
problem.
get a chance
If I can help somebody get a job, I'll do that, no problem. I mean, I'm not taking a cut there. So
Totally. So yeah, so for learners trying to get into it, yeah, those are great tips, Marko. And that is really the thing for me too, is a lot of people search for the job and we're not necessarily thinking about the life fit and all of the other parts of what'll make you happy when you get to that job. So you don't have to just move from your new neighbors. But I guess kind of getting down to maybe one of our last little things here is how about businesses looking to get into the cloud? Because I know for a lot of learners thinking about cloud jobs, they may not realize what struggles businesses are going through and just how badly needed cloud champions are. So what do you think? What are some of the gotchas and what are some of the quick starting points that a business could look for, maybe across small, medium, and enterprise?
well, I mean, any size of business that you are, when you're adopting cloud, it's a process, right? So it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. A lot of the management thinks, yeah, we're using AWS, boom, we're in the cloud.
Done.
No, you're using AWS. You're having people click through the management console, right? If you're clicking through the management console, you're not using AWS. Same goes for Microsoft or Google, whomever you're using. If you're not addressing everything through APIs, if you're not automating everything, to me, you're not using it yet, right?
I am clouding. Look at me go. Click, click, click.
Exactly, and that's the big sort of misunderstanding that comes from the business, where they say, oh yeah, look, we have 10 people clicking through the console and doing stuff. Well, yeah, great, they're learning. The console is a great place to learn. The console is a great place for a SysOps team to have monitoring. That's a great place. But
Sure,
other than that,
not to get rid of the GUI, but yeah, sure.
yeah, other than that, if it's not like using Cloud9 and AWS where you're actually using the IDE through the browser,
Oh yeah.
that's great, right? If you're not using workspaces to run your desktop off, it's a different thing. But everything that you're doing is going to have to be automated. It's going to have to be scripted. You're going to have to move to a sort of DevOps or CI/CD or some kind of process that's going to be continuous, and some kind of process where you're going to be able to take feedback and figure out how you're migrating things, figure out how you're going to be upgrading, and all of those things, right? A lot of companies, they lift and shift and think, wow, we're in the cloud. We're going to get 90% savings. No, you're probably going to be paying more at the end of the day if you lift and shift, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those steady state workloads they're trouble.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we typically see is like a spike in cost, and then slowly they realize, oh my god, this is expensive, and then there's a drop, and then there's another spike, and then there's a drop and spike and drop and spike, and they fluctuate between like over provisioning, under provisioning, and that can mess up your business's whole reputation, right? The business needs to understand the interface, their application, their front end of their website, whatever the entry point for the user is, that's your SLA. Right? That's your SLA to the user. And that's, if you screw up your SLA to the user, you're going to ruin your reputation and lose customers. And however you're going to adopt, whether you're a small business, whether you're, 2 people or 2,000 people or 2 million people in your business, it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight, because everybody needs to learn how to use this new, completely different technology.
I'm glad you brought up the timeline.
Think about how much it took you to get into the cloud, right? How many years did you struggle with figuring out why cloud? Why can't I have a central disk where I have access from all these? Why this shared nothing architecture? Just wrapping your mind around the methodologies and everything that's in cloud is difficult. It takes time, and
hit those value points eventually. That's gonna take time.
I don't know if I answered your question really. I just went off on this whole segue about cloud adoption.
Well, I thought you kept it generic enough on the small, medium, and enterprise scope to be applied. Do not forget the timelines here. A lot of organizations are looking at a 1 to 2 year realization on a lot of these cloud delivery models. Unless you're a startup who just flew by us in in like a hot rod because they have no baggage and they can just jump in full bore, who are also not going to have a bunch of steady state EC2 instances running all over the place most of the time, then you're probably in the camp where you need to watch that timeline and you need to think about the most important value contributors, like the SLA you mentioned. Yeah. And then how you're going to protect that through this transformation. Because you only get one chance to ruin your good name out there in the industry. And you don't want to end up having that happen. And then also buy a whole bunch of expensive stuff that you can't properly use. So yeah, very tricky. So Marko, buddy, I really appreciate you coming and chatting with us today. How can people find you and reach out to you if they wanted to chat with you some more or maybe look for jobs?
Yeah, sure. Connect with me on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com and then that slash thing. And then it's my LinkedIn ID is Marko Sluga, MARKO SLUGA. Or you can reach me at Marko Cloud, MARKO Cloud on Twitter. And the whole string for YouTube is just too long for my YouTube channel to say it out loud right now. Because I can't remember the 32 characters that come behind the YouTube channel name. But yeah, just look for me on LinkedIn. You'll find me, Marko Sluga, and also at Marko Cloud on Twitter.
No, that's perfect. I will put all of those notes on screen and in the course description as well there. So yeah, Marko, I really appreciate you coming and chatting with me today, buddy. I know that I've had a lot of conversations with you through Slack and stuff over the years. It was great to finally kind of chat person to person here, albeit in quarantine virtual mode.
For sure. I mean, it's nice. Yeah.
But yeah, man, let's try and chat again sometime down the road here. And for all of our friends kind of joined us out there today, keep studying, working hard. There are tons of opportunities in the cloud. It is a dynamic place by definition. And so the more that we can look for ways to become dynamic learners and professionals, the farther we're going to go with it. So I do hope everybody sticks with it. You can find me here on YouTube as well. And I'll be training there on CBT Nuggets with my AWS courses and other cloud training. So keep in tune, friends. Check back soon. We're going to have a lot more fun cloud conversations coming up. Once again, Marko, I appreciate it, buddy. We'll check you guys out. See you in the cloud.
See you, Bart.